In 1961, the CIA tried to overthrow Fidel Castro by landing Cuban exiles at the Bay of Pigs. The invasion failed and it damaged relations between the USA and Cuba. The failed invasion showed that the United States was not as powerful as it thought it was, and it led to a standoff in which the whole world wondered if there would be a tomorrow. Hi there and welcome to the History Teacher. This revision video covers superpower relations and the Cold War, 1941 to 1991, from the GCSE Edexcel 9-1 course. Hopefully you'll also find it useful if you're studying any of the other exam boards, or if, like me, you just love history. Hi there guys, we are well into topic 2 now and picking up speed. This time we're going to be taking a look at the events leading up to and the causes of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuba is located just 200 miles off the coast of Florida, and for years, until 1959, the USA worked closely with its near neighbour. Since 1952, Cuba had been run by a military dictatorship led by Fulgencio Batista, who encouraged US involvement in Cuba. Cuban society was very unequal, with the people living in extreme poverty, while the rulers lived in luxury. Many US businesses were located there, and a large percentage of the land was owned by Americans. Additionally, many of the utilities, including oil, electricity, and phone lines, were owned by US businesses. Finally, the USA was a major shareholder in Cuba's main export, sugar. The Cuban people were not happy. They did not like the leader Batista, and they did not like the amount of influence the USA had over their country. So, in January 1959, two Cuban nationalists, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, led a force to overthrow Batista and set up a socialist government with Castro at its head. At the beginning, the USA did recognise the Cuban regime, but worried about the socialist element, they withdrew their financial support. Then, in May 1959, Castro announced he was taking all of the land owned by the USA and its citizens into state ownership. Castro ignored all protests by the USA. With the withdrawal of support from the USA, Castro now looked to the USSR to support Cuba's new socialist government. So, in February of 1960, Cuba signed an agreement with the USSR. The agreement was that the USSR would trade its oil for Cuban sugar and would provide economic aid to Cuba. A secret agreement was also made to provide Cuba with weapons. Unsurprisingly, the USA were alarmed at this turn of events. They were especially unhappy that communism was now right on its doorstep, so they removed their support for the sugar trade and banned all further trade with Cuba. Then, in January 1961, the USA broke all diplomatic ties with Cuba. The new US President, John F. Kennedy, was alarmed at having a communist ally of the USSR so close to US soil, so he met with the CIA and military advisors to decide what to do next. The CIA believed that Castro's control of Cuba was weak, and that most Cubans hated Castro and would therefore support a coup. However, the USA did not want to be seen to be militarily involved. The CIA suggested training exiles from Cuba who had been forced out due to their involvement with the USA. The plan was to make the attack look like a revolt by the people of Cuba. To achieve this, they provided the Cuban exiles with some basic military training and disguised some old US planes as Cuban planes. On the 17th of May 1961, 1,400 Cuban exiles landed on the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. From the very start, the whole operation was a complete disaster. Castro had found out about the invasion in advance and sent approximately 20,000 Cuban soldiers to meet the landing party. The exiles had little military experience and had only received some very basic training from the US, and so were no match for the Cuban forces who had been fighting Batista's forces since the 1950s. Additionally, the CIA's beliefs about the Cuban people were wrong. They did not want the old system back, and Castro was largely popular, so there was no expected uprising. The CIA could provide no military support to the exiles, as this would reveal the USA's involvement. So, the Cuban exiles, outmanned and outgunned, immediately surrendered. Even worse, from the USA's point of view, the disguised planes were recognized by the Cuban government, and photographs of them were sent to the world's media. Now, the entire world knew that the USA had organized the invasion. The Bay of Pigs was humiliating for the USA. They'd spent much of the 1950s accusing the Soviet Union of empire building in the east of Europe. Now it appeared that they were doing the same in the Caribbean. Khrushchev seized on the opportunity and declared the event showed the popularity of communism among the ordinary people. Castro declared that he was now a communist, and the ties between Cuba and the USSR were strengthened. Then, in 1961, Khrushchev publicly announced the USSR would be providing arms to Cuba. Cuba was now equipped with modern military equipment and training from Soviet experts. The whole plan from the USA's point of view was a disaster. Okay, that's everything you need to know about the Bay of Pigs invasion and its causes and consequences. Let me know in the comments what you thought of it, and don't forget to check out my website for worksheets and revision guidance, and I will see you next time.